The thunder of hooves echoed across the dusty prairie as Zadie Lewis ran for her life, her tattered dress catching on the wild sage, her breath coming in desperate gasps. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Her father and the men he'd sold her to closing the distance with every passing second. The year was 1875, and in this corner of Wyoming territory, a woman's reputation was worth more than her life, especially when that reputation lay in tatters. "Get back here, girl," her father's voice boomed across the open plain. "You've brought nothing but shame to this family." Zadie's tears blurred her vision as she pushed forward. The shame wasn't hers to bear, it never had been. The banker's son had forced himself upon her, and when she'd fallen with child, he'd denied everything. Now, at 19 years old, she was damaged goods, sold by her own father to a traveling man who promised to take her far away from decent folk. Her foot caught on a rock, sending her sprawling into the dirt. The fall knocked the wind from her lungs, and as she struggled to rise, she heard the riders approaching. This was it. There was nowhere left to run. "Stop right there." The new voice cut through the air like a whip crack. Zadie looked up to see a lone rider galloping toward them from the west, silhouetted against the setting sun. He rode a magnificent chestnut stallion, and even at a distance, his presence commanded attention. "This ain't your business, stranger," her father shouted as the rider approached. The stranger pulled his horse to a stop between Zadie and her pursuers. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of his worn Stetson. His face was weathered but handsome, with a strong jawline shadowed by stubble. "When I see a woman running for her life from 4 men, I make it my business," he said, his voice low and steady. He extended his hand to Zadie. "Name's Hayes Holloway. You all right, miss?" "She's my daughter," her father spat, "and she's been sold fair and square to make up for her shame." Hayes's eyes narrowed as he helped Zadie to her feet. "Sold? She's ruined," her father continued. "Carrying a bastard child. No decent man would have her now." Zadie trembled with fear and humiliation, unable to meet the stranger's eyes. "How much?" Hayes asked suddenly. "What? How much did you sell her for?" Her father named a sum that made Zadie flinch, the price of her life and freedom reduced to mere dollars. Without hesitation, Hayes reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out the money and tossed it to her father. "There. Double what you asked. Now she belongs to me." The men looked at each other, surprised by this turn of events, but money spoke louder than principles in these parts. Her father pocketed the cash with a grunt. "Your problem now, mister. Good riddance to bad blood." As they turned to leave, Hayes called after them. "One more thing. If I ever hear of you trying to sell another human being, I'll make sure the territorial marshal knows about it. That's a hanging offense these days." The threat hung in the air as the men rode away, leaving Zadie alone with her unexpected savior. She wrapped her arms protectively around her still flat stomach, fear evident in her eyes. What are you going to do with me?" she whispered. Hayes's expression softened. "Nothing, miss. I'm taking you to safety is all. There's no shame in my house." The journey to Hayes Holloway's ranch took several hours. They rode in silence, Zadie perched in front of him on the saddle, her body tense with uncertainty. As they crested a hill, she saw a sprawling homestead nestled in a green valley below a sturdy log house, a large barn, corrals full of horses, and acres of fenced pasture. "Welcome to the Double H," Hayes said. "It's not much, but it's home. Why did you help me?" Zadie asked, her voice barely audible over the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves. Hayes was quiet for a moment before answering. "My ma was in a similar situation once. Nobody helped her. I swore I'd never turn a blind eye to someone in need, especially a woman being treated as property." As they approached the ranch, a woman with silver-streaked hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face lined with concern as she saw Zadie. "Hayes Holloway, what have you brought home this time?" she called out. "Mrs. Whitaker," Hayes explained to Zadie, "my housekeeper. Best cook in 3 territories and not afraid to speak her mind." He helped Zadie dismount and steadied her when her legs threatened to give way beneath her. "This is Miss Zadie Lewis," he told Mrs. Whitaker. "She'll be staying with us for a while, Mrs." Whitaker's sharp eyes took in Zadie's disheveled appearance, the fear in her eyes and the protective way she held her middle. Understanding dawned on her face. "Well, don't just stand there, child. Come inside. You look like you could use a hot meal and a warm bath." She shot Hayes a look. "I'll take care of her. You see to your horse." Inside, the house was simple but comfortable solid furniture, braided rugs on the plank floors, and a large stone fireplace that dominated the main room. Mrs. Whitaker led Zadie to a small bedroom off the kitchen. "This was my room, but I've moved to the loft above the kitchen. You'll have more privacy here." She paused, her expression softening. "How far along are you, dear?" Zadie looked down, shame coloring her cheeks. "About 2 months, I think," Mrs. Whitaker nodded. "Rest now. We'll talk more after you've had some sleep." That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Zadie stared at the ceiling, wondering what fate awaited her here. Hayes Holloway seemed kind, but she had learned the hard way not to trust in men's kindness. Still, she had nowhere else to go, and the child within her needed shelter. For now, at least, she was safe. The next morning, Zadie woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed in the clean clothes Mrs. Whitaker had left for her a simple calico dress that hung loosely on her frame and ventured into the kitchen. Hayes sat at the table, nursing a cup of coffee while Mrs. Whitaker tended to breakfast. Both looked up when she entered. "Good morning, Miss Lewis," Hayes said, rising to his feet. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you." Zadie hesitated in the doorway, unsure of her place. "Sit, child," Mrs. Whitaker urged, placing a plate of food before an empty chair. "You need to keep up your strength." As they ate, Hayes explained the workings of the ranch, the cattle operation, the horse breeding program, the staff who helped him run things. "I won't expect you to work," he assured her. "Not in your condition." "I'm not an invalid," Zadie said, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "I can earn my keep." Hayes smiled, and it transformed his weathered face. "I don't doubt it, but for now, just focus on getting your strength back." Over the following weeks, Zadie settled into life at the Double H. True to her word, she found ways to make herself useful helping Mrs. Whitaker with the cooking and cleaning, tending to the kitchen garden, even learning to make candles and soap. The physical labor helped quiet her troubled mind, and slowly her fear began to recede. Hayes kept his distance, treating her with a respect she'd rarely known from men. He was often gone from sunrise to sunset, working with his ranch hands or riding the boundaries of his property. But in the evenings, they would sit together by the fire while Mrs. Whitaker knitted, and he would read aloud from one of his book's adventure stories, poetry, or newspapers from back east. Zadie found herself looking forward to these quiet evenings, watching Hayes's strong hands carefully turning the pages, listening to his deep voice bringing the words to life. He was an educated man, she realized, not the rough cowboy she'd first taken him for, one evening after Mrs. Whitaker had retired for the night. Hayes closed his book and looked at Zadie. "You never told me your story," he said quietly. "I haven't wanted to pry, but if you'd like to talk about it." Zadie stared into the fire, the flames reflecting in her eyes. "There's not much to tell. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. He took what wasn't freely given, and when I found out about the baby, he called me a liar. My father believed him over me." Her voice broke. "I became the shame of the family, a burden to be rid of." Hayes's jaw tightened with anger, but his voice remained gentle. "You know that's not true, right? The shame belongs to the man who violated you and those who failed to protect you, not to you, and certainly not to your child." Tears slipped down Zadie's cheeks. "My whole life, I've been told a woman's virtue is her only value. Without it, I'm nothing." "That's horse manure," Hayes said firmly. "A person's worth isn't determined by what others do to them, but by who they choose to be despite it." He reached across the space between them, hesitated, then gently took her hand. "And from what I've seen, Zadie Lewis, you're one of the strongest, most dignified women I've ever met." Zadie looked down at their joined hands, feeling something stir within her that she'd thought had died forever. Trust, perhaps, or the beginning of it. As spring turned to summer, Zadie's body changed with the seasons. Her belly swelled, and with it grew a fierce, protective love for the child she carried. Hayes, true to his word, made sure she had everything she needed: a doctor from town who checked on her regularly, books about childbirth and infant care, even a cradle that he built himself, working late into the night in his workshop. One sweltering July afternoon, Zadie found herself drawn to the corral where Hayes was breaking a new Mustang. She watched from the shade of a cottonwood tree as he moved with the animal, his movements both firm and gentle, building trust with each interaction. "He's got a way with wild things," came Mrs. Whitaker's voice beside her. "Always has." "He's a good man," Zadie replied, her eyes never leaving Hayes. "That he is, too good for his own welfare sometimes." Mrs. Whitaker gave her a meaningful look. "He doesn't bring home every stray, you know." "There was something about you that touched him." Zadie's hand went to her rounded belly. "My situation, you mean?" "No, child, you, the fire in you even when you were at your lowest." The older woman patted her arm. "I've known Hayes Holloway since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when you're not watching." Before Zadie could respond, a commotion erupted in the yard. 3 riders approached, and even from a distance, Zadie recognized one of them, the banker's son, Thomas Wilcox, the father of her child. Terror seized her heart. She retreated behind the tree as Hayes approached the men, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Something I can help you gentlemen with?" Hayes asked, his stance casual but alert. Thomas dismounted, his expensive boots raising dust as he landed. "I'm looking for a woman." "Zadie Lewis. Word is you've taken her in." "And who might be asking?" "Thomas Wilcox, of Wilcox Banking and Investment." He straightened his tailored jacket. "The woman is carrying my child. I've come to make things right." From her hiding place, Zadie could see Hayes's expression harden. "Funny, I heard a different version of events. One where you forced yourself on her, then called her a liar when she came to you with the consequences." Thomas flushed. "Lies. She threw herself at me, then tried to trap me with claims of a child that might not even be mine." Hayes took a step forward, his voice dangerously low. "So which is it, Mr. Wilcox? Not your child, or you've come to make things right? Can't have it both ways." Thomas hesitated, then changed tactics. "My father insists we avoid scandal. I'm prepared to marry the girl and give the child my name." "How generous," Hayes said, contempt evident in his tone. "And what happens after the wedding, after you've secured your family's reputation? Will you be a loving husband to the woman you violated, a devoted father to her child?" "That's none of your concern," Thomas snapped. "She's damaged goods anyway. I'm doing her a favor." In that moment, Zadie stepped out from behind the tree, her head held high despite her fear. "I don't want your favor, Thomas, or your name." All eyes turned to her as she walked forward, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Hayes moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring, Thomas's face twisted with anger. "You don't have a choice." "You're nothing but a—" "Careful," Hayes interrupted, his voice like steel. "The next word out of your mouth better be respectful, or it'll be your last on my property." Mrs. Whitaker had slipped away during the confrontation, returning now with the ranch foreman and several hands, all armed and looking grim. Thomas glanced around, realizing he was outmatched. "This isn't over," he warned. "That child has Wilcox blood. My father won't let it go." "The child has Lewis blood," Zadie corrected him, "and it will have Holloway protection. Tell your father that." Something shifted in Hayes's expression at her words, but Zadie was too focused on Thomas to notice. "You'll regret this," Thomas threatened as he mounted his horse. "Both of you." They watched in silence as the 3 men rode away, dust billowing behind them. "Are you all right?" Hayes asked, turning to Zadie. She nodded, though her hands trembled. "I never thought he would come after me. His family was so eager to be rid of me." "Money and pride make men do strange things," Hayes said, his eyes still on the horizon. "But don't worry, no one will take your child from you, not while I'm alive." The confrontation with Thomas changed something between Zadie and Hayes. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Zadie found the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind for months. "Why did you really help me that day? The truth, Hayes." He was silent for a long moment, his profile strong against the fading light. "I told you about my mother being in a similar situation. What I didn't tell you is that she wasn't as lucky as you. The man who bought her, he wasn't kind." His hands tightened on the arms of his chair. "She died bringing me into this world, alone except for a midwife with more compassion than most." Zadie's breath caught in her throat. "Hayes, I'm so sorry." "The midwife raised me until I was 8, then consumption took her. I ended up in an orphanage." He turned to look at Zadie, his eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "I swore that if I ever had the chance to change someone else's story, I would. When I saw you running across that prairie, it felt like fate. And now, with Thomas threatening to return." Hayes reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Now I'm even more certain that you belong here, if you want to stay, that is." Zadie looked down at their intertwined fingers. "What exactly are you offering Hayes Holloway?" "Safety, protection." He paused, then added softly, "and time. Time for you to heal, to find yourself again, to decide what you want your life to be. No expectations, no demands. And if what I want is—" She hesitated, suddenly shy. "If what I want is more than safety and protection." Hayes's eyes widened slightly, and in them, Zadie saw a vulnerability that matched her own. "Then we'll talk about that when the time comes. For now, let's focus on bringing that baby into the world healthy and strong." As if on cue, the child within her kicked, making Zadie gasp and place Hayes's hand on her belly. His expression of wonder as he felt the baby move sealed something in her heart that had been broken for too long. August brought relentless heat, and the final weeks of Zadie's pregnancy. Her body felt heavy and unwieldy, but there was a peace in her soul that had been absent before. The ranch had become her home, its routines a comfort, its people her family. One scorching afternoon, as Zadie rested in the shade of the porch, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced visitors. Hayes, who had been reluctant to leave her side as her time drew near, grabbed his rifle from its place by the door. "Stay inside," he told her, his voice tense. "Mrs. Whitaker, keep her company." But as the riders drew closer, it became clear this was no small party. At least a dozen men approached, led by an older gentleman in a fine suit, clearly Thomas's father, the banker Wilcox. Hayes stood his ground as they halted before the house, his ranch hands emerging from various buildings to stand with him. "Mr. Holloway," the elder Wilcox called out, "I believe you have something that belongs to my family." "There's nothing here that's yours," Hayes replied evenly. "The child my son fathered is a Wilcox," the banker insisted. "It will be raised as such, with all the advantages our name and fortune can provide." "And what of its mother?" Hayes demanded. "What place do you envision for her in this grand plan?" The banker's expression hardened. "The girl is irrelevant. We're prepared to compensate her for her inconvenience." Inside, Zadie listened from behind the partly open door, her heart pounding. Mrs. Whitaker placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Let me understand," Hayes said, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "You want to take a newborn from its mother's arms, pay her off like she provided some service, and pretend this whole ugly business never happened." "It's the sensible solution," Wilcox argued. "The child will have opportunities it could never have otherwise. And the girl can start fresh, without the burden of an illegitimate child." Hayes shook his head, disgust evident on his face. "That child is not a burden, it's not property to be bought and sold, and its mother is not some inconvenience to be paid off and forgotten." His voice rose with conviction. "There is no price you can name that would make me complicit in separating a mother from her child. Not now, not ever." The banker's face flushed with anger. "You forget yourself, Holloway. We have influence in this territory. One word from me, and your ranch could face problems: water rights challenged, grazing permits revoked, loans called in. Are you threatening me, Wilcox? Consider it a business proposition. Step aside, let us take what's ours, and your life continues undisturbed. Hayes's laugh was without humor. My life hasn't been undisturbed since the day I met Zadie Lewis, and I wouldn't have it any other way. He leveled his rifle. Now get off my land before I forget my manners entirely. For a tense moment, it seemed as though violence might erupt. Then, to everyone's surprise, Zadie stepped out onto the porch, Mrs. Whittaker hovering anxiously behind her. "Mr. Wilcox," she called, her voice clear and strong despite her fear, "your son knows what he did to me. In his heart, he knows the truth. Ask him if you dare. Ask him to swear on his mother's grave that he came to me honorably." The banker turned to his son, who had been hanging back in the group of riders. Thomas couldn't meet his father's questioning gaze. "And even if he lies again," Zadie continued, "know this. I will fight with everything I have to keep my child. You may have money and influence, but I have something stronger: a mother's love and the protection of a good man who understands the meaning of honor." She moved to stand beside Hayes, who shifted his rifle to one hand so he could place his other arm around her waist, supporting her. The banker studied them for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "This isn't over," he warned, echoing his son's earlier threat. But there was less conviction in his voice now, as if he'd seen something in their united front that gave him pause. As the Wilcox party rode away, Zadie sagged against Hayes, suddenly lightheaded. "That was brave," he murmured into her hair. "Foolish, but brave." "I couldn't let you fight my battle alone," she whispered. "Our battle," he corrected gently. Then, with alarm, "Zadie, you're trembling." She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "It's not fear, it's the baby. I think it's coming." The next 12 hours were a blur of pain and determination for Zadie. Mrs. Whittaker sent for the midwife from town, while Hayes paced outside the bedroom door like a caged lion, flinching at every cry from within. Finally, as dawn broke over the eastern hills, a new cry joined the chorus, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Hayes froze, his heart pounding, until Mrs. Whittaker opened the door, her face tired but beaming. "You can come in now," she said. "They're waiting for you." Zadie lay propped against pillows, her face exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as Hayes entered, tears shining in her eyes. "Come meet your namesake," she said softly. "Henry Hayes Lewis." Hayes approached the bed on unsteady legs, overwhelmed by the emotions flooding through him. The tiny face that peered out from the blankets was red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and a determined set to his little jaw. "He's perfect," Hayes whispered, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's cheek. "But Zadie, you don't have to, I want to," she interrupted. "You gave us a home when we had nothing. You stood between us and danger without hesitation. His name should honor that." Hayes sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving the miraculous little being before him. "May I hold him?" Zadie carefully transferred the bundle to Hayes's arms. The moment the baby settled against his chest, something shifted in Hayes's world, plates rearranging themselves to make room for this new, overwhelming love. "Hello, Henry," he murmured. "Welcome to the Double H. We've been waiting for you." Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm centered around little Henry's needs. Zadie blossomed in motherhood, her natural strength and grace shining through even in the exhausting early days. Hayes found himself captivated by both mother and child, stealing moments throughout his busy days to check on them, to hold Henry, to simply watch Zadie as she sang to her son. One crisp September evening, with Henry sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Hayes found Zadie sitting on the porch swing, gazing at the stars. He joined her, the swing creaking gently beneath their combined weight. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, offering her a steaming cup of tea. She accepted it with a grateful smile. "I was thinking about how much my life has changed in 6 months, how I went from despair to this." She gestured at the peaceful ranch around them. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find it was all a dream. Hayes took her free hand in his. Not a dream, though I've been doing some dreaming of my own lately. Oh, Zadie turned to face him, curious. I've been dreaming of a future. One where Henry grows up strong and proud, knowing only love and security, where he has siblings to play with and fight with. Hayes's voice grew softer. Where you and I grow old together on this porch, watching our family thrive. Zadie's breath caught. Hayes. I know it's soon, he hurried on. Too soon, maybe. You've been through so much, and the last thing I want is to pressure you, but I need you to know what's in my heart, Zadie Lewis. He shifted to face her fully, his eyes earnest in the lamplight spilling from the window. I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day when you looked up at me from the dust with fire in your eyes despite everything you'd endured. Tears spilled down Zadie's cheeks. I don't deserve this, don't deserve you. That's where you're wrong, Hayes said firmly. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, and if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my days trying to give it to you. Are you asking me to marry you, Hayes Holloway? He smiled, reaching into his pocket to pull out a simple gold band. I am. Not because Henry needs a father, though I'd be honored to be that for him. Not because you need protection, though I'll stand between you and harm until my dying day. He held the ring between them, a promise made tangible. But because I love you, Zadie Lewis, and I can't imagine my life without you in it. Zadie looked at the ring, then into Hayes's eyes, seeing in them everything she'd ever wanted and never thought she'd find: respect, admiration, desire, and above all, love that asked for nothing in return. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, I'll marry you. Hayes slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, his kiss a seal on their promise. From inside the house came Henry's cry, as if the baby sensed the momentous shift in his world. Zadie laughed against Hayes's lips. Your son has impeccable timing, she murmured. Our son, Hayes corrected, his forehead resting against hers. Our family. They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony on the ranch, with Mrs. Whitaker, the ranch hands, and baby Henry as witnesses. Zadie wore a new dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair and Hayes's mother's locket around her neck, his wedding gift to her. As they spoke their vows beneath the spreading branches of the cottonwood tree, Hayes looked into Zadie's eyes and saw their future unfolding challenges and joys, hard work and sweet rewards, all of it faced together. There's no shame in my house, he had told her that first day, offering shelter when she needed it most. Now, as he kissed his bride with Henry cradled between them, Hayes knew it was more than just an absence of shame that defined their home. It was love, fierce, protective, and unashamed, that had transformed them both from wounded souls into a family. And in the years to come, as the Double H prospered and grew, as Henry was joined by sisters and brothers, as Hayes and Zadie weathered storms both literal and figurative side by side, that love only deepened, proving that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from the darkest moments if only someone is brave enough to say, there is no shame in love.